Afternoon and evening, everyone, depending on where you're from. My name is Jacqueline. I am representing the Battleship Missouri Memorial. We are so excited to have all of you with us today. Obviously, there's a lot of personal connections and stories that we have in the audience, so it's great to be able to bring you all together to kind of share in this experience and discussion together. I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules for everyone. I do hope that everyone had a chance to watch the film already. If not, it will still be available for a couple of days following this and then later airing on PBS stations nationwide. Please make sure to mute yourself throughout the presentation. We will open it up to Q&A sessions at the end of the program. Please chat your questions to us and we will help facilitate that. If you are on your laptop, please check your view screen in the top right-hand corner and change it to speaker view. That will allow you to focus on the individuals that are talking versus the gallery view where it shows everyone. Just makes for a nicer presentation. And lastly, we just invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy the program. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Carr, our president and CEO, to do a quick introduction on the Battleship Missouri, as well as our speakers today.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. I'm Mike Carr. As Jacqueline said, I'm the president and CEO of the Battleship Missouri. I want to thank you all for joining us today. This is the biggest turnout that we've ever had for one of these Mojo events, and I'm sure that's because the topic of the surrender on the Battleship Missouri is so interesting for all of you. As Jacqueline noted, I hope everyone has had an opportunity to watch the film. As have I. I've watched it twice already, very moved both times. This story about the surrender, of course, is the most famous story about the Missouri, although there are many others. But this is a story that we have shared now with over 9 million visitors who've come and visited the Missouri since we opened to the public a little over 20 years ago. It's not a story about vengeance, rather it's a story of peace and reconciliation, and really one of the things that makes this ship one of the most famous ships in U.S. naval history. Just this past September was the 75th anniversary of this event, and we had planned to have thousands of people join us that day, along with 13 or 14 gentlemen like Don Fosburg who had actually witnessed the ceremony. But very unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions that we had no control over, we were forced to disinvite the people who were going to come. And although we had a great ceremony, which I think is still available for viewing, with a flyby and another ship passing in review and some wonderful speakers. Unfortunately, there was only about 50 people to see the ceremony. So I'm hoping that we can make that up somehow in the future and still get some of those World War II veterans back here and honor them. It's my pleasure now, after, I don't know if you want to keep hearing from me, but I know you're here to listen to Tim and to Don, so I want to introduce Tim Gray to you. He is the founder and president of the World War II Foundation, which has won various awards, including 5 regional Emmys for his distinguished film writing and documentaries. PBS and its affiliates have ranked the World War II Foundation and Tim Gray Media as one of the top 5 programs requested on a national scale. Tim is also the founder of the Normandy World War II International Film Festival at Saint-Comte-du-Mont, France, which is the only film festival that focuses strictly on documentaries and short films about World War II. And I'm very excited and pleased to welcome Tim Gray and his latest work, The Surrender on the USS Missouri. Tim?
Tim, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I think I got muted. I think my wife had muted me.
Mm-hmm.
So it happens every day continuously. She's always hitting the mute button, but it's so great to be with all of you, and especially with Don, having Don here, and I'm sure you would very much rather hear from Don than hear from me. But it's just an incredible memorial to that time and to that battleship that you guys have there at Pearl Harbor, and a story that we've been wanting to put together for a long time. So definitely honored to be here. Thank you.
The other person, of course, whom I want to introduce to you is Don Fosburg. Don joined the Navy when he was 17 years old in 1944, and his 19th birthday was September 2nd, 1945. Don was originally from Illinois, but now after graduating from Augustana College, he settled in Southern California and worked in the insurance industry. Don's 95th birthday will be this year, and we hope he can come and visit us here on the battleship Missouri. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's it's an honor to be with Don today. And I think one of the things we look for in our foundation are amazing stories to tell, and to have veterans who can tell those stories. And as you can see from some of the photos, hopefully you can see them on your screen now. Don Fosburg is one of those people. And there's a nice shot of Don there on the left with Diamond Head in the background, enjoying some time in Hawaii, and some other shots of this handsome man who is still very handsome today, as a matter of fact. And this was our 28th film that we've done on the personal stories of World War II. And we travel all over the world and shoot these films on location. And we were very fortunate a few years ago to be given a 2 or 3 hour window to put a drone camera up around the USS Arizona Memorial, and of course the USS Missouri. And it hasn't been done since. It hadn't been done before, and the Navy was nice enough to give us that window where we were able to get some extraordinary shots of this battleship. And our audience really, you guys know a lot of the stories about World War II, and some you may not know from your own family members, but our target audience are students and younger people who really aren't taught World War II today. And they're not really taught in the schools about that time period from 1939 to 1945. And to me, that time period still resonates today. We are who we are today because of what men like Don Fosburg were able to do during that time when they were called on by the United States of America to serve their country. And they did it in a very humble manner, and they worked together as a team, and they came home and helped rebuild America and do great things. And they also came out of the Great Depression. So they were a hardened group when they went in to fight a world war, which they just considered a job to them. Much more, we consider it much more than just that, but to them it was to finish the job and then come home and go on with their lives. And a lot of people did not come home. I mean, over 414,000 Americans did not come home, and many are still buried in overseas cemeteries in places like Normandy and the Punch Bowl, of course, in Hawaii. And cemeteries like Manila and in Europe. So, we can't forget about them. And that's part of the mission that we have. But I know you want to hear from Don, because Don was a part of history. And when you look at the defining moments in the history of the world, there are moments where you can say, I was there when the world changed. It changed at that very moment. And Don Fosburg was on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945, and witnessed when the world changed, when peace came to the world after between 50 and 70 million people had died between 1939 and 1945, not only in the Pacific, but of course in Europe as well. So to have somebody actually be there when it officially came to its end is extraordinary, and to witness the things that happened on that day. When the Japanese boarded the USS Missouri. So Don, I want to jump right into it with you, because you were the birthday boy on that day. What is the thing that stands out most in your mind when you think back to September 2nd, 1945?
Well, I think, like everyone, we were extremely happy that this was over. And of course, the one thing we were thinking of is, when do you go home? Probably that was uppermost in most of us. I don't think that we realized the significance then that it's achieved now, I never expected to do anything like this. And because we just went in the service, all my friends were going in the service. I come from a town of 400 people. We were probably 80% of the young men were there in, and we came home and went back to work. The one thing that we did, I think, was a little different is I was in the big class in college where everybody joined in 1946. And I think the professors must have really wondered, what should we do with all of these guys? How do we teach them? I mean, we had men that were majors, and we had all kinds of people that had been in much action. And surprisingly, most of the men that back went into college, their purpose was to get an education and go out and start to work. There was no high school ideas. I mean, we all were different in our thinking on that. As far as the day that we had to surrender, of course, I was quite impressed. And I was celebrating a 19th birthday. And nobody knew it, though, because there was too many other things going on. Some of the things that happened, I don't know what you would wish to hear, or is there anything that you especially want to hear about?
Well, I want to get your reaction. When did you first hear that the USS Missouri was going to be the ship on which the unconditional surrender would be signed on? And when you heard that, what was your reaction?
Well, the first thing, we heard it probably the latter part of July or the first part of August. And we heard something about the surrender being aboard a ship, and it was going to be ours. And the question was, what are we supposed to do? Well, naturally, you're sort of excited. And the first thing that we found out is that the crew members started to get the ship in shape. That was primary the few days before we went into Tokyo Bay. Everybody was working. I didn't have to work. I was a radioman. We didn't do much deck work like that. But they did do a lot of work when we were in the Bay of Sagami 1, and then from there we went over to the Tokyo Bay. And that was quite an impressive thing when we went into Tokyo with the fleet. We were in one of the first ship, and this huge fleet flying in sails into Tokyo Bay. I mean, it must have been impressive for everyone. And then you also saw the devastation on the shoreline. Tokyo Bay is big, so you don't get real close to the shoreline, but the devastation was still obvious, and the filth, and even a body floated by, and you're impressed by everything, and of course, and excited about what are we going to do.
There was a point where you're handling a lot of the radio traffic. You're getting coded messages. You're receiving top secret messages. One of the messages came in August that asked the USS Missouri to move away from the coast of Japan. You guys didn't know why you were being ordered because you had been shelling at that point the coast of Japan, but you were asked to move away from the coast of Japan. And that message came in. And what was that message?
Well, we had been, if you recall on that, we've been bombarding northern Japan. And we were asked to, I guess, now I remember on the Seaman Second, I'm not on any of the information like that, but we were moving, we'd done our bombarding apparently, and we were moving south and to another location, which we were going to do some damage. And I was a radioman. There was nothing happening. There was no, the Japanese were pretty well defeated at that point, so they weren't attacking quite as much. So we were back to sort of normal operation. I went down to the radio shack, and one of my jobs was to type messages that had been decoded by the officers. And there was a message laying on my desk. And I looked at it, and it was a top secret. I thought, I'm really not supposed to have this. But I read it. And the message was, now we're talking 76 years ago, so bear with me. The message said that the Third Fleet was to move away from the coast of Japan, and I don't know, 300 miles, 400 miles, I don't recall, because of an activity that the results were not totally known. Well, it meant nothing to me, of course. And but a few days later, it became obvious what the message was about. I gave it to an officer, and he took the message, and that's the last I ever saw of it. But I wish I'd kept a copy.
Yeah, the message was about the dropping of the atomic bomb, and
that didn't say that, though.
But that's what they were alluding to as far as moving away from Japan and getting away. The first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and of course, the second bomb 3 days later was dropped on Nagasaki. But you had no idea there was such a thing as an atomic bomb.
Yeah, no, we weren't aware of anything like that. And I've often wondered, were we as the ship, did anybody aboard the ship know this? I'm not sure that anyone was aware of it, including Halsey.
Yeah, I wouldn't think he would be. I think it's a top level type of thing. So that basically, the Japanese finally surrender, at least Hirohito surrendered. The Japanese military still wanted to go on and fight after the dropping of both atomic bombs. Hirohito decided that the war will end. The Japanese military tried to take Hirohito out because they were adamant that the war should continue. And if the war did continue, Missouri would have had a role in the eventual invasion of Japan that November, correct? So that must have been a big relief for you guys to know finally when Hirohito said enough is enough, that the war was over, because any invasion of Japan would have been costly for everybody, correct?
Right. Surprisingly, we were aware of the invasion. Everybody aboard ship, I think everybody knew that they were going to invade in the latter part of October, November. And obviously, when we were doing the bombarding of the coastline, it was a little preparation of what was going to happen if we did an invasion. Because I think, they have a pretty good description of what was intended. And there was going to be a lot of bombarding of the coastline for a period of a week or 2 weeks prior to the invasion. So we were aware of that. And naturally, it's a big relief that you don't get involved in that. I don't think anybody was looking forward to anything like that.
No.
They were looking forward to the idea that we're going to go in and invade, but it's not a pleasant anticipation.
No, it wouldn't have been. It would have been a really devastating action for both sides, for both the Allies and the Japanese. Let's talk about that morning of September 2nd, 1945. What do you remember about that morning before the Japanese launch pulled up to the USS Missouri? What was going on in the ship in order to prepare for the things that were going to happen in the next couple of hours?
Well, first of all, we had to get the surrender deck. They got it ready to bring all the officers and everybody aboard. And my job was, I was in the radio, I dealt with the press. So we were in the crew's mess. We'd set up tables, and the people with the press would come down and do what they wanted to do. And I know as that everything was getting set, and I can remember they opened the hatch to the main deck back by the crew's mess, and they yelled down that we need a table. And the table that they had was too small. So the guys, we got the table and handed it up to a couple of guys, and they took a crew's mess table up to the surrender deck, and it was large enough. They put a green cloth over the top of it, and that's where all this, the signing of the surrender was done. And then afterwards, the question came up, what happened to the table?
Right.
I can't say for sure, but I'm positive. That sounds like I'm saying something for sure, but that they did bring the table back. So it's one of many. The question is,
where is it?
Have three places have the original table? I don't know.
I think I see it in back of you in your office there. Is that the original table in back of you that you've had all these years? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Where were you when the Japanese launch came? Where were you situated? I know you were dealing with the press. Could you see anything that was going on?
Well, I could, of course, we watched some of the ships come up. And even though I was on duty, I took off and went up, and so I could see the actual ceremony, or a portion of it. I didn't get to see it like the guys hanging on the superstructure, but you could see the activities and the number of men and all the people up there. And that was, of course, quite impressive. Interesting point on that. Well, you've probably read about it, but MacArthur, when he was announcing, what we were going to do and everything. And if you notice the officers aboard the ship around the surrender, nobody has a tie. Not one person had a tie on. MacArthur, I can remember him talking about that we will not be formal. We will use our working clothes and no one will wear a tie. No, we're not going to give any kind of respect to the Japanese at that point. And it was true, except for one guy, and I think he's from the Netherlands. He had a tie on.
Yeah, it was a situation where khakis were the order of the day. You just alluded to the Japanese and showing no respect at that moment in time, and a lot of it had to do with Pearl Harbor and the ferocity of the fight on the islands throughout the Pacific, and Guadalcanal and Tarawa and Peleliu and Iwo Jima and all these other savage fights that went on. There was also a moment where the Japanese their delegation boarded the Missouri, and General MacArthur had guards set up to welcome or just oversee the arrival of the Japanese. And all of those guards were 6 feet tall or over.
Right.
to give. And why was that? Why was it that he wanted these tall men there at that point when the Japanese delegation boarded the Missouri?
Well, I think it's impressive if you have everyone was over 6 feet as the Japanese came up, and none of them were. And we looked quite military and quite impressive too when they came in. And it was quite obvious to people watching it too.
Intimidating.
It was intimidation, another part of the orchestration of the event by General MacArthur.
I think MacArthur made a point of doing things that, gave that impression that we were the winners.
The superior force had won. You talked about dealing with the media. And what do you remember about the media delegation that was there that morning to document that part of history? It was a huge, huge contingent of press, correct?
Yeah, well, and a lot of it, mostly military, were there. And of course, they're down there doing their thing, typing, and we didn't deal with them in the sense that we did any work with them, but they would give us messages or what they wanted sent out, and also bring them a cup of coffee. So that was primarily the only thing that we did with the press. And then, of course, we could send out a lot of the messages.
Everybody who was on board that day got a little card, and I know we have a picture of it, and we'll put it up in a second. And you still have that little card that everybody on the ship, the 3,000 plus who were on the ship that day, were given this small card. Could you talk about the card that you were given and why you've kept it all these years?
Well, at the time, it's just a little paper card, a cardboard card. Well, there's a picture of it. And of course, we all got one. And it wasn't anything that we were excited about. But the point of it is that it had the ship seal on it, because there's all kinds of cards out now, but they do not have the ship seal, which made it the official card. And everyone received one. MacArthur has it, Halsey has it, I have it, and you kept it. And it became more and more significant I know on the 50th anniversary of the signing, we had a reunion, and I think it was Seattle, and everybody said, bring the card if you have one and wear it. And of course, most of the guys, there was a lot of us alive at that time. We all brought our cards and wore, and you'd be surprised. Everybody stopped you and said, what's that? They were not aware of it. So now it's become quite a collector's item. And I keep mine in the safety deposit box.
And that's your son, John, who is holding the card there. Did you share these stories with your son after the war? There's so many people on this Zoom tonight who had parents and grandparents who were involved in World War II, never, ever shared the stories, just felt as though, they wanted to kind of keep it to themselves. They didn't want to burden their sons or daughters or grandkids about things they may have done or things they may have seen, or just war in general. Did you talk to your son, John, about your experiences during the war, or are you starting to open up maybe a little bit more now later in your life?
I don't think when you came out of the service, we'd talk to each other. When you get together, you find that you always end up talking about something that happened in World War II. And you did that a lot, in college, on reunions. It's very common to talk, but you just didn't sit down and say, I'm going to tell you some stories about the Navy, anything like that. Once in a while it would come up. In fact, I told a story to some friends of John Friday, and he said, I never heard that story before. Well, I didn't think anything about it. And so as it became more talked about, I probably have told more stories now than before.
Yeah. The ceremony itself lasted, 23 minutes? I mean, it was not a long ceremony. What happened after the ceremony? Were you able to watch the Japanese delegation leave? What was the feeling on the Missouri after this historic moment had finally happened? Or did you at that point realize still at that point that this was such an historic moment?
Well, like you said, it lasted only about, I thought it was around 35 minutes or 20. And MacArthur made a very short but very pointed speech. And when it was over, the Japanese left, and the officers, everybody started to leave the ship. I mean, they didn't stay. We didn't have a party or anything. Mm. And actually, we went back to duty. The flyover. And they had the flyover, of course.
Right.
The flyover was immense. And but the people, the men aboard ship, we went back on duty, and it was just as if it had never happened. I mean, it was over with and it was through. And then we, of course, stayed at Tokyo for, we left the 6th of September. And that was impressive because we were headed out. And,
did you talk at all about after the ceremony? Like, did you guys talk as crewmen to each other and say that was, wow, that was, or was it just straight business and everyone back to work?
It just was over with, and we went back to, we had our duties. So, you didn't sit around and shoot the breeze. I mean, you went back to work. So, no, it wasn't. And we talked a little bit about it when we were sailing back to Hawaii, but it more, to be honest with you, we talked more about, hey, we're getting back to the States. That seemed to be important.
Everybody's going home.
Everybody's, yeah. The when we left Tokyo, they have a plan of the day. The ship has every day they print a plan of the day, and it tells you exactly what's going to happen at that specific time. And so when we left on the 6th, it gave you got up at 4:30 or something. We had breakfast. We had a very nice remark by Halsey saying goodbye to the ship, and that it was payday. They had payday on the 6th. And we had to go through a minefield. So they did have, we were at general quarters because they weren't concerned, but still they put you at general quarters when you went out of Tokyo Bay to get through the minefield. Mm-hmm. And then we were off to Hawaii, except we stopped and they gave us a day ashore at an island called Mogmog. And I thought it was just a name, but there was really an island named Mogmog. And they did put you ashore with 2 cans of warm beer.
Oh,
and
nice.
That's our celebration after that.
I don't want to gloss over the flyover because that's a thing that a lot of people remember. There were some who said there were so many planes and it lasted so long that it turned the sky black and the planes kept flying over. And there was a fight between the pilots. They all wanted to be part of this flyover on September 2nd, 1945. Do you remember being on the battleship and just watching, at 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes
it lasted. It seems like it lasted a couple of hours. And I did know some pilots and they said, we all wanted to fly over. It was I think everybody would have flown over. And of all sizes of planes, you had fighters and you had bombers, and it was quite a sight. And that must have been very impressive to the island people when they saw that.
I think it was kind of the frosting on the intimidation cake that MacArthur had served. We're going to end, the Japanese had left, we're going to end with this show of air power to let you know this would have been what would have been coming if you had not surrendered. And I know it's a lot of what the crewmen talked about after was being able to witness that.
Well, yeah, you did talk about the flyover because you saw planes I didn't even know, going over. And but I think it was the impressiveness of the size. Then it covered the sky over the Tokyo Bay. And that probably is, and you see it on television too. You see the flyover. But it was big.
We're going to take some questions in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to ask you, we've kind of been looking at how many USS Missouri crewmen are still alive today. And we're coming up with a number, and Jacqueline and Michael came up with a number that, is roughly 18, could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more. When you look at the fact that there were 3,000 plus people on that battleship that day, and most of them were Missouri crew, and there are only 18 left. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel proud to have been a crewman, but a little bit sad that so many of your friends are now gone?
Well, of course, all my friends are gone now, and that we were pretty close. One of them, we considered each other brothers, and he just passed away a couple of years ago, and he was a radioman with me. But it's hard to believe that everybody is gone. I mean, 18 of us left,
roughly.
Of course, you got to remember the crew members, like myself. I was one of the youngest on the ship, so you did have some young crew members that obviously are still living. But because most of the surrender, I mean, the high-ranking officers, none of them were 17 years old or 18 years old.
No.
And, I was 18, and that makes me pretty young compared to the rest of the people.
You were a baby. You were calling the guys who were 23, you were calling them pops.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, most of all my commanding officers were at least in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
None of them are living that I am aware of.
And that was one of the challenges for the film, is to try and find the people who witnessed that. And we were able to come up with you and a couple other guys, one who was a Marine on the battleship, part of the Marine detachment, which was roughly about 40 guys on the battleship. So that was the challenge we had with this film, was trying to identify living Missouri crewmen and get to you guys. And surprisingly, which I think is tremendous because it doesn't happen all the time, all of your stories of the guys who were in the film were still quite vivid, and your memories were all really in tune with what happened back in 1945. And we were really blessed to have that, because that's not the case with a lot of veterans these days. And you're right, you are a baby compared to some of these 102, 103-year-olds that we interviewed. So you always have to be a little lucky with a film. And I think we were beyond lucky to have you and the other guys as a part of this. So bless you and your health, and you were the birthday.
I still know one. I think Brock. Is Brock one of the living ones? He's still living.
Yeah, there are a few guys that we didn't get to, and a lot of it, as a filmmaker, a lot of the challenges over the past year and a half have been things like COVID, where we weren't allowed to go to an assisted living facility and interview people there. We could only interview people at their home, or we couldn't go certain places because of COVID. So we were doing all these interviews for the film while COVID was in its real ravaging stages. And like I said, bless you, because you were home, and some of the other guys were living at home as well. And that made it much easier. But it was just an honor to be able to interview you for the film, and you're doing great. And so I
in other words, I just lived long enough to make it to these things.
Yeah, well, you've done well. You've got a good son there, John, who takes very good care of you as well. So I know we've got a lot of people who want to ask you some questions. So I'd like to go ahead, Jacqueline, if it's good with you, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for some questions for Don. We'll go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. We actually have quite a bit of questions from our audience members, many of whom have family relatives that served on board with you, Don. So there's a lot of personal connections out there. One of the questions coming from Jen was, what was the attitude or mannerisms of the Japanese when they came aboard that day?
Well, the attitude, there was only a few Japanese that came aboard. So we didn't have any contact with them. But the Japanese soldiers, one of them came up alongside the ship and we threw stuff at them. I mean, we weren't exactly fond of what had just happened. My cousin was on Corregidor. He was killed. My other cousin was killed. Another cousin was killed. One of my best friends was killed. It wasn't your attitude was a little different than it's become now.
I can imagine. Courtney asked, what happened in the days immediately following the surrender ceremony? When did you get home and how were you discharged?
Well, like I mentioned, we left on the 6th of September. Then, of course, we went through the canal. And that was, of course, impressive. And then we went up to Norfolk and then on into New York. Now, New York, I think we got there on Navy Day, or I'm not sure. But that was the most impressive thing I've ever seen. We came into New York, and there was a fog bank. We couldn't get into New York when we were supposed to. We just sat off the coast, blasting the foghorn, and then finally it cleared enough. We came in, and as you come into New York, you go past the crowd on the shoreline was thousands of people. And every ship in the harbor was out there blasting their horns. All the fire ships were out squirting water in the air. We were all lining the deck, and it was something you can't believe. then we docked, and we were allowed to have guests or people could come aboard. I think it was around 20,000 people the first day. And so everybody's, jabbering. We did a lot of talking. A lot of stories were told at that. But it was a very impressive. And, I came into New York not long ago on a cruise ship. And we came down that same thing. And boy, it reminded me, I could just picture it again. We didn't have any ships blasting water, but it was still the same, thinking of it. Yeah.
Another question that we have from Jen is, what did all of the American sailors think of all the high dignitaries that came aboard that day for the ceremony?
What did the sailors think of the high dignitaries that came aboard that day?
Well, we were impressed with all of our officers. And there was MacArthur. I got to see him. Wainwright, and he'd been captured, and you saw him. And that I think we were very impressed with that. The Japanese dignitaries, no, I wasn't. They were surrendering.
We have an attendee, Carol Ball, who's on with us. Her father, Thomas Charles, served as a radio man on board during that same time frame. She's curious, how many radio men were there on the USS Missouri?
Okay, I was interested in who is she?
Repeat the name again.
Her father's name was Thomas Charles.
Thomas Charles.
Charles. The name's familiar. Now the number of radiomen that's aboard the ship, there's quite a few of us, and you don't associate with everybody because you're on duty 4 on. I think it was 4 on, 4 off, 4 on. Anyway, your group would be on duty, and then you leave and you go to get things like your food, get your washing done, get things done. Then you go back on duty with the same group. And you go off, and it stays that way. So there were some radiomen that I never even met that were active, and yet I knew quite a few of them. Well, most of them anyway.
Did you recognize it? Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, but the name is familiar, Charles. That I'd have to look back and see if I have him. He was a radioman. In fact, I've got a picture of the radio group, and we all signed it.
That's pretty cool. We also have.
Now you're going to make me go home and read, see if I can find his name.
Research.
We also have Lisa with us. Her dad, Robert Schultz, served as a radio man with you on board.
Oh, Bob Schultz?
Yep.
Oh, Bob Schultz, he's the one that we consider ourselves brothers.
Oh boy.
His daughter is on with us today.
Huh?
Hi, Don. Good to see you, Don.
Oh, well,
Lisa.
hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. Yeah, of course, Bob. He was one of the top guys with me. Yeah, gosh almighty. He still got the ranch? Are they still getting people over there?
Sometimes, yes.
Really? I tried to get a friend of mine to go over, take his school group over, because it's a pretty educational trip.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's wonderful to see you. I wish we could have gone to the ceremony this past September together.
Yeah, well, I thought we were.
Yeah.
Don, we have another question from Jeffrey. He's a former Navy Seabee, and he wants to know, what moment would you consider the most memorable aside from the surrender ceremony?
Well, that's pretty hard to say other than the surrender. That still is it. Well, there was some that was sort of, the one was traveling by bosun share from one ship to the other. I remember that. And then, of course, you remember all the men that you dealt with and the trips you took, and those were all important.
The kamikaze attack.
So.
Jacqueline, I have a question. Just wanted to jump in because Don said something in the film about being in Bremerton, Washington, years after the war when the Missouri had been put in mothballs at Bremerton, and you took your wife back to the Missouri, correct?
Yes.
And what was that like for you to go back on board?
That story that I told.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were traveling. I happened to be up in the Seattle area, and I wondered where the ship was. I knew it was up there someplace. This is prior to about 40 years ago. And I was told it was at Bremerton and in mothballs, but you could drive to the ship. So we found out, knowing the area, I found out where it was, and we drove down, and there's the Missouri. It's in mothballs, but you can go aboard. There's a gangway takes you aboard. And so I told my wife, I said, let's go aboard and we'll go up to the surrender deck and I'll show you the plaque. And she, okay. So we walked aboard the ship. Now, if somebody told me this, I would never believe them, but it's true. I walked aboard that ship and I got on we were on the fantail down on the, and all of a sudden it came alive. Now, I know nobody's going to believe this, but it's true. It actually, I was young, the men, the ship was in active, men were all around. Now, it lasted about 3 seconds, but believe me, it happened. And that was really strange because it just was as live as when I was on it. So, now, if you believe it, fine.
I do believe it, actually. I put it in the film, so I believe it.
And that was, of course, then the next time I saw it, it was the 50th anniversary, and we went there for the reunion because I'm active in the, well, I was in the reunion. And I do go down to the Iowa on occasion and do some docent work down there. Right. And you made a remark here at the beginning about the kids need to be educated on this. I used, one of the things that I did was they had me sitting there in the wardroom of the Iowa, and I had a plaque that said I was in World War II aboard the Missouri, the usual thing. And people would come by and talk to you about it. What I found is that the young people are not aware of really what went on. Some of them did not know. Now, this sounds impossible, but it's true. Some of them did not know who fought in the war. Who was our allies in Europe? Well, there was Britain, Germany, and that was it sort of bothered me. And some of the kids were not aware of, well, what's a battleship? What was the war? What did you fight in? But strangely, some of the young people from foreign countries, they asked questions that I couldn't answer. So I think you're right. They do need a story like this will be good for education.
Hope so.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks to the hard work that Tim did putting this film together, as well as the work we continue to do at the Battleship Missouri Memorial every day to educate not only all of our visitors, but youth groups as they come aboard too, from schools and colleges alike. Don, we have Dean in attendance. He was a Missouri crew member in the 80s, and he shares your experience of coming aboard the ship post-retirement and having it come alive for him. So you're not alone in that. We do have another question from Jen. Her father was Joseph Haizu from Binghamton, New York, and he was a gunner's mate. Do you happen to know any of the gunner's mates that served aboard?
No, actually, probably the biggest, well, the only group that we were involved with would be radio. Gunners, they were on the deck, and I had nothing to do with the gun. I never shot a gun. So that they were something that was way beyond me, what they did. He was a gunner's mate. He could have been on a 20 or a 40 or a 5-inch. They shot 5-inch and made me deaf for a long time. So
That was actually leads nicely into our next question from Jeffrey, who was curious, how loud were the 16-inch guns?
the one,
How loud were the 16-inch guns?
you know,
That's how loud.
That's how loud. Yeah.
yeah. Surprisingly enough, after the war, I went up on my battle station was Sky Lookout. I was at the very top of the ship. This is after the war. And we were down in Cuba. And they went out and they had practice firing the 16-inch. Well, during the war, when they did the firing of the 16-inch, I was in below the armored deck one time, and another one I'm in another, but I'm enclosed. But this time I'm out. So they fire off to the starboard. They fire all 9 guns at the same time. So they're ready to fire. And I'm wondering what's this gonna be, because I'm outside. And boy, there's 3 buzzes. There's a buzz, and on the 3rd buzz, they fire. And on the 3rd buzz, I'm down. Well, it was a big boom and not as vicious as the 5-inch. And the heat, you could feel the heat from the gun. And you can watch the shell go through the air. You can watch 9 shells go through the air. They change positions, but they go. And you can see them for quite a ways. So actually, it's a huge boom, but not as a crack like the 5-inch. And it's much easier to withstand. But it did raise my hat right off my head, raised it up and dropped it back.
We have 2 audience members whose fathers served in the 16-inch guns, so they know that well as well. How was it that you became a radio man? Jack is wanting to know.
How did I become a radio man?
Yes.
Really? Okay. When I was in high school, I took a course called typing because I thought it was going to be easy. And it turned out to be one of the best courses I ever took. And anyway, I took typing. When I went in the Navy, they're giving us tests after we got out of boot camp. And one of them was code. They'd go, did it, da, did, and you had to go, what was that? They told us ahead of time, like 3 dits is an S, and I was able to type because I could know where the keys were. They said, you can type, you're going to be a radio man. That's how I got to be a radio man. And it turned out to be good because I ended up, I felt with one of the best jobs aboard ship, and that was typing the messages after they were decoded by the officers. And then I was able to I read messages before the captain.
One more question from our audience. They were interested, did you go to Europe with the ship after the war?
Oh, to Turkey?
Yes.
Yeah, we like I said, we were down in Cuba, and then we got a message we had to take that ambassador back to Europe. And we went back to Norfolk, put him aboard the ship, and then we went back to Europe and went to Turkey and Greece, Italy, Algiers, Tangiers, Gibraltar.
Wow.
Great trip. And it was all free.
We also have Ken Jordan on the call with us. He was the ship's last XO, so he's joining us today as well. I have one more question for you. I've always been told that. Oh.
I was going to say, you know, when you showed a picture of the 3 pictures of me, the middle one,
yep,
was at the Parthenon.
Parthenon.
Oh. I have one last question for you, Don. I've always been told that Missouri sailors are very proud of their ship and proud of her history. Do you have that same sentiment?
Proud of your ship?
Yes.
Of course, but it's easy because it's probably the best on the sea. So it's easy to be proud of that ship. It's great. We do get in a little argument with the Iowa once in a while, but no, the Missouri is really the top. Oh, there's pictures of my friends. Yeah.
Well, I think that rounds out our program for today. Thank you to both Tim and Don for joining us. Tim, thank you for sharing your wonderful film with all of us. As I mentioned, it will be available for a couple of days post this event. Otherwise, you can see it on PBS stations nationwide. Tim, I believe you also said it'll be available on your website starting in June.
Yeah, I think June 1st, it'll be available for free viewing on the website. And a quick thank you to country music star Luke Bryan. It's the first time he's ever done a narration of anything, and I thought he did a real fine job. And he's the biggest country music star in the world right now. And he took some time out from his busy schedule to do this and really enjoy the whole experience. So thank you to Luke.
Again, we thank everyone for joining us today. We'll be sending out a short survey just to thank you guys all for your time, and we'd love any feedback you have to offer us on this event so we can better future events as well. Please be sure to stay in touch with us online or in person. We are open for visitors now 5 days a week, soon to be 7. You can follow us online on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And if anyone is interested in a good cup of Joe, we invite you to see our friends at Old Salt Coffee Company using code MOJO10 for a wonderful Battleship blend coffee that they did in partnership with us. And we thank you all again for your time and questions, especially you, Don. Thanks so much for joining us.